welcome to Popular Liberty. I'm going to be tonight. I'm going to be responding to two guys that I really really respect. That would be Ace and Keith from Slurp Gang and Don't Tread on Anyone podcasts, respectively. And these two guys are two guys I really really like, and I've been on shows with both of them and had good conversations. I really, I like them as people. I think they're very intelligent and very well informed, very well read. I think they made a mistake. They did a rebuttal or an analysis of Curtis Yarvin a few weeks ago that I felt like was they had one major misunderstanding that kind of permeated their entire presentation. By the way, for this presentation, they clearly put a lot of effort into this. I mean, it was like 3 hours long, and it was clearly they put a lot of work and research into this. But there was one central misunderstanding that they had that kind of negated most of their arguments for the for basically their whole presentation. All of their arguments were kind of based on the idea that Yarvin is talking about a medieval monarchy when he's not. And and I think that's and there were some things I felt like, okay, that's a little bit out of context, the way you're taking that. But tonight we're going to be going point by point and kind of clearing up some of this and giving a much faster rebuttal. This is not going to take 3 hours. I'm going to play clips at like 2x speed every now and then, just because it was 3 hours long and I might need to refresh myself on what exactly was said. I did take a lot of notes, and also I do want to say, we really should be respectful to both of these guys. These guys are really actually very strong intellectuals, and I think they just misunderstood what was being talked about, and I think more likely they were just unfamiliar with patchwork, which is the actual argument that they should have been going up against. And there are good arguments against it, and but they didn't make those. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The core of their argument really is that Curtis Yarvin is advocating medieval monarchy, which is that the king basically owns all of the people. Basically the people are his private property. And no, not at all. That's not accurate. When Curtis Yarvin is talking about monarchy, and this is where on their first slide that they quoted Yarvin saying that. No, Caleb, this is going to be like maybe an hour and a half. This is going to be a much shorter episode. So Curtis Yarvin, he's talking about a corporate monarchy, which is basically a private law society. That's so right off the bat, when he says monarchy and he means a special kind of private law society, like right off the bat, all of their arguments for like the rest of 3 hours against him, are kind of thrown out the window. And we're going to go through a few sources on this. We're going to read a few excerpts from Patchwork on that kind of prove that he really is talking about a private law society. And so, like, some of the basic quotes, where they're like, okay, well, he wants like a one he's basically a one monarch for the whole kingdom, for like the whole country. Like, no. Basically, he says, hey, after these, our crappy republics are gone, what should replace them is a, global spiderweb of tens, hundreds, even thousands of, sovereign, independent, many countries, each governed by its own joint stock corporation, without regard to the residents' opinion. If residents don't like their government, they can and should move. The design is exit and no voice. Basically, the entire problem can be described as one of security. Stability and security are basically the same thing. Each state, and this is where it gets to be key. A patchwork, feel free to drop the capital, is any network consisting of a large number of small but independent states. To be precise, each state's real estate is its own patch. a sovereign corporate owner, i.e. government, of the patch is its realm. At least initially, each realm only holds one patch. In practice, this may change. And so he says the entire problem can be described as one of security. And he talks about the designers of the Constitution of 1789 were political engineers, but they weren't stupid, they weren't ignorant, but they did something wrong, and the government they designed diverged immediately from its original design. And he said, and he's going through and talking about, okay, well, how would we design something that's not going to diverge? And and using a proper incentives now that we understand them a little bit better. He says, rather, I think the best way to think of a realm or a sovereign corporation is as a modified version of monarchy. A royal family is to an ordinary family business as a patchwork realm is to an ordinary non-sovereign corporation. Joint stock realms thus have the primary historical problem of a monarchical government. And the vagaries of the biological process. In other words, they assure that the overall direction of the realm will always be both strong and responsible, at least responsible in the financial sense. Because again, right here, what he said, what he's done is he's separated the ownership and the management of the monarchy itself, of the corporation. This was a major critical innovation in human history that was in March of 1602, when the Dutch East India Company was created, unironically and uncoincidentally by a monarch, a Catholic king, and in Holland, I believe. And basically, his idea is that the patch is basically going to own its own property, so they are the rightful owners. Not just like they conquered it, but like they actually are the owners. They're BlackRock, basically. Okay, not great, but that is true that they are the rightful owners of the property. And he puts it like, in crystal clear terms right here. He says, to put this in patchwork terms, the relationship between a realm and a patch is no more, no less than a property right there. Everything, a patch is a sovereign property. That is one whose proprietor has no defender but itself. Nonetheless, in moral terms, we may ask, why does this realm hold that patch? And the answer is, as it always is with a system of strong property rights, it will not be because it deserves to, but because it does. Yeah, and he says, suppose a realm, this is where he gets into, okay, well, what's so we have tens of thousands of corporations that are all trying to own their own property, and so like they all own their own property. So what about the people who live there? Well, the people who live there are basically they live there by contract. And let me move myself over here. I can't do that. And basically they all have to live, but in order to live on the patch, you have to sign a contract saying, okay, here's the I agreed to be a good little boy and you agree to treat me fairly, and that's about as much as you can expect from it. But in this case, it's not just like a social contract or whatever. It's actually a real physical contract that you have to click to sign or something like that, and you agree to it. But the way this contract is enforced is not like, okay, well, what if I break a law? Well, no, it's like, well, what happens is you might have to leave, or you may pay a fine or something like that is stipulated in the contract. And so again, when he's talking about monarchy, he's talking about a private law society. And so if you're going to be, when Ace and Keith are making arguments against him as if he's talking about a medieval monarchy which has real, property rights violations, inherent in it, it's like you're not being fair to him, this is not his actual position. And when he's talking about monarchy as a corporation that is the actual private property owner, it's like this is something that is completely compatible with a libertarian mindset. And one of the things that they brought up was, okay, like, well, what about like you say you believe in monarchy? Well, what about North Korea? And he actually answers that in here, directly. Suppose a realm unilaterally abrogates the right of immigration. So you have a contract that's signed that says you're allowed to live there, and if you don't want to live there, then you have to leave. And if you want to leave, then you have to presumably you have to find a place that's willing to take you, or something like that. And so the suppose that you have an evil corporation, not that's a fair question, that decides that it wants to basically abrogate the right of immigration, the right to leave. What do you do? And he said he basically says, sure, that can happen, and if it did, you would say, yes, massa, and the slave you are, and a slave you will be forever. And is it, this is terrible, of course, and he's not like defending this as a good thing. He says, but the mechanism that we're going to rely on to prevent it is not some implausible deus ex machina. It's not an Indian rope trick. It's like you're relying on the sound engineering of the profit motive, which seems to work most, pretty much everywhere it's tried. And it's actually, I can make the argument a lot stronger, but we're just going to read what he's saying right now, that a realm that pulls this kind of crap is never going to be trusted by anyone again. No one's going to visit. Tourism disappears, and the potential real estate bid from that it goes way down because no one wants to live there. And you have a whole bunch of human property now, but you're going to find that slavery is not it's not actually great for economic growth. It's like, okay, you can say, oh yeah, well, what about like North Korea? Like, well, which patch of real estate would you rather own? North Korea that has like a GDP of like 19 billion, or South Korea, which has a property value of like 1.6 billion, and that's like their GDP. So it's like, if you really want to, and by the way, there's also like the counter argument of, well, okay, well, what about Liechtenstein? Liechtenstein is, basically it's one of the wealthiest countries on the planet in per capita wealth. They earn close to $100,000 per person. And by the way, and you have the right to secede if you want to. Nobody does. Taxes are also really low and voluntary. And so this hereditary, North Korea is probably technically a hereditary monarchy, but again, he's not advocating like a medieval style monarchy. He's advocating a corporate monarchy where the corporation is the rightful owner of the of that property. And like with like Liechtenstein is like, you have the right to secede, and taxes are voluntary and low. Everyone pays the tax, and nobody wants to secede. I think that's kind of telling that nobody wants to. This is why it's like one of the major like case examples for why I say, this is probably how it's actually going to work, because I mean, the guy who owns Liechtenstein is way better off than the guy who owns North Korea. His people are happier, they're wealthier, they're more productive, and he doesn't need nuclear missiles. And so but for Yarvin, I mean, he's talking about again, like, you have to sign a bilateral contract with the realm. You promise to be a good boy and behave yourself, and the realm promises to treat you fairly. There is an inherent asymmetry to this agreement, but that's not really a big deal because we have that all over the place. But basically, you have no real enforcement mechanism against the realm. Just as we have no real mechanism against the United States government. However, a realm's compliance with this customer service agreements is sure to be a matter of intense attention, amongst residents and prospective residents, because again, this is here to make shareholders a profit. That's such a critical distinction, that because it solves all of the problems that that medieval monarchy had. Medieval monarchy had like 4 major scalability issues that ended in its demise, going down into a republic. And we won't get, I think we might get into them a little bit later, but for right now, separating ownership and management solves all of them, and the main problem being like the circulation of elites and the consent of the people. And because those are things that keep it artificially small, and not artificially large, artificially small. And so basically Yarvin solved this. So, but as far as like the North Korea argument that Keith and Ace made, Yeah, it's like, well, which one would the shareholders be happier with? They're going to be happier owning like a Liechtenstein or a South Korea. That's just the case. That's just how it is. And this is where they, basically, so let's see. Oh, there was all. Let me go back because there was a few extra arguments that he made or that they made. Basically, the you know so they go on to say that, hey, well, what about like diseconomies of scale? That hey, that if you basically what a diseconomy of scale is that if as a corporation grows, the information bottlenecks that can arise will keep it artificially small and will make it stay and make it inefficient. And I would say that's kind of a strange argument for for like an ANCAP to be making, that oh no, the government might be artificially small. It's like, oh, okay, sounds good to me. And but this is not really an issue here because when you have shareholders, you have an effective restructuring mechanism that you can actually. This is what why having publicly traded corporations is so dang important. Is that by having this shareholder mechanism where shares can be bought and sold, I can move money, away from a corporation, and and reallocate that to where it's more efficient. So if a corporation got to be way too big to the point where its information bottlenecks were just eating it alive and making it unprofitable, shareholders could easily sell those shares and move that money, and to a corporation that was doing a better job. And that this is a this major innovation right here is something that medieval monarchy did not have. It did not have an effective restructuring mechanism. Whenever the monarch died, it was often up for grabs. Whoever was going to be who the next king was often up for grabs. Not always. It was often got passed to someone who like legitimately, quote unquote, had a right, like maybe his brother or to his son or something like that. But there was often wars, and because it did not have a good mechanism for entry, its mechanism for the circulation of elites was broken. And but where I have like a billion shares outstanding, it's pretty quick, quick and easy to buy those shares up for myself. And, there I am. I'm part of the elite. Anybody can get in if they can just buy the shares. And that helps out quite a lot. So to rebut their basic argument in, one sentence, he's not talking about medieval monarchy. He's talking about a private law society. So all of their criticisms for like the next 3 hours, of their show basically go right out the window. They don't apply. He's not talking about, a traditional state. He's talking about a private law society. So, number two. So, like number two, he's talking. They criticize him about he views the state as a moral neutrality. It has it's like a morally neutral thing. And I think there's something here where they're being. Yeah, I think that this is a kind of a fair criticism. He is an atheist, and I think that he's at least being consistent here. And while Yarvin is correct in saying that that this thing is a tool that can either be used to promote good or promote evil, I think their point is more correct. That even if the state is used to promote good, the fact that it does so by aggressive force, takes away from its morality. Like if a cop catches a bank robber or a purse snatcher, we would say that cop promoted good. The fact that the hypothetical cop did so at the expense of, less than 1% of the population who are anarchists and don't consent to the monopoly of policing at all, certainly takes away from the cop's hypothetical moral good of stopping thieves. And, by the way, I think that's a much better characterization, because it's not like they're, violating the rights of the 99% who really do consent to the, consent far too much to the, to the monopoly of police and to the monopoly of the state. And because, way less than 1% of the population are anarchists. And, but I mean, hey, they still have rights, and those rights still get violated in order to fund the cops, and which they do not consent to. So that is a moral, demerit on their record. where I think their criticism, doesn't quite go as far as they think it does, is that we fundamentally, we fundamentally disagree on how much they, consent to the state. I think if humans, like from the time of Sumer until now, were actually presented with a physical social contract, like what Yarvin's kind of, proposing right here, nearly all but like a few basis points of them would sign it in order to live in the society that the private state governed. And given what we've observed throughout human history, I imagine human history probably would have been bloodier for it. But probably not if it were a corporation, but like let's say the king actually did give you a contract. Yeah, I imagine it would be probably worse because I mean, looking at through human history, every time humans are given the option to consent to a state, it turns out that super majorities of them will actually consent to quite spectacular feats of evil on their behalf against outgroups. And yeah, as a side note, this is a phenomenon that's actually predicted by the archotropism praxeology. But I mean, we've had periods of stateless societies in history, and they were generally either like so small as to like kind of trivialize the term anarchy, but by labeling as such, or they were large and they had terrible problems with violence and against people and property. So like when Yarvin like criticizes libertarians as wanting to be their own sovereigns, or kind of like maybe the old quip of like they hate their dads. Like I genuinely agree with him, as this is very characteristic of a substantial segment of nominal libertarians. And now I think Ace and Keith, they would disagree with Yarvin on who qualifies as a libertarian. And I think I would adopt the more Yarvinian definition of someone who takes the name. And if we use the definition of people who would like adopt the term libertarian, Yarvin's critique is pretty well founded in reality. Particularly if we like capitalize the L and put parentheses around it. Just saying. Like the critique is pretty false if we limit it to like the Mises Institute types of pure libertarians. And Mises libertarians, however, are a minority, a very substantial minority of nominal libertarians. And if this weren't true, there wouldn't need to be an LP takeover right now. And I don't think it's very sound to define a group of people by only the quote unquote purist minority. And and they were, criticizing him for like, hey, because he said, it's it's kind of a childish idea that, you can get, be your own sovereign and you can be your own king, gives you kind of like a monkey high or something like that. And they were criticizing him, saying that, you think that, any like that a king has the right to own people, and like again, no, he doesn't. That's not the kind of monarchy he's advocating for. And and so like they're criticizing medieval monarchism as childish. And it's like I wouldn't quite use the term childish, because like children usually don't think about either libertarian or monarchist ideas. I would use the term adolescent to describe most, nominal libertarians, but not Mises types. Mises types are different. They tend to buck the trend. Yeah, but this rings true as as the adherents of libertarianism are generally, much younger people in their late teens to mid 20s. However, for like medieval monarchists, I would describe their ideas as like primitive, not adolescent. As medieval monarchism is a very, very well thought through ideology. And it produced unfathomable wealth, which our current republics, are still like trying to squander all of. And basically it rescued billions of humans from the barbarianism that we suffered for 200,000 years. I mean, sure, they suffered from many of the same more primitive moralities that have been a part of the human condition for 200,000 years, up to including the vast majority of people in the present who still suffer from most of those same primitive ideologies. Yeah, and so the it's like, yeah, it's like, is it like I it's like, yeah, okay. Anyway, I'll just move on. The second, let me change the slide. Why is it not going? Alrighty, there we go. I forgot to change that slide there. Basically, let me move my notes. Basically, where he says that, like, that libertarians, they don't believe in anything productive or effective. That they were responding to him, like saying, well, okay, what about you? Like, your whole thing failed. And I think what they're kind of missing here is a criticism that I've made a lot is that libertarians have no political praxis because they have no like formal praxeology of predation. That just does not exist. And they have a very, very thorough praxeology of free market economics, but not of the state itself. And like Sam Konkin was probably the closest, and he correctly defines the zero sum value proposition of aggression, which is like a stone's throw away from the law of pseudo demand, which we will talk about later. And basically their entire understanding of progression, of predation is like why it's bad for production. And and that's like it's true, but it's not exactly helpful. And so the like they yeah, it's true but not helpful. And basically what you need is like because what we need to answer is the question about what must be done about the state. And the example of like Power in Markets by Rothbard, it's like it's entirely written from the perspective of why predation is bad for production, but this doesn't tell me actually how predation works. And and this is something that Yarvin's actually done a really good job at talking about. He's not using the archotropism framework, but he does have really, really excellent instincts, having grown up as like a diplomat's son. And that's where all of his excellent instincts come from. And and related, this is why libertarians need the theory of archotropism to kind of complete their praxeology. And for because right now it's like you have a lot of things that are really, really good in your economics, which are good for production, good for that. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about you're not able to say what must be done about the state. You have a whole bunch of ideas which are have basically all failed because you don't have an actual praxeology of of the state. You don't understand its value system, and it's extremely important. And so like there was a debate Yarvin had about futarchy, and in it he says like, I'm not just a Luddite, I'm a protectionist. And he's being a little tongue-in-cheek and edgy here, and I'm not sure that they quite grasped that, but their argument against him was basically the normal libertarian rebuttal of protectionism, which is completely valid and true. I don't really have any disagreements with them there. Again, but the problem with with their critique here is that in the context of a private law society, this is not actually a problem. And you might say, okay, well, that in a private law society, it's very likely to be a free trade society. I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. But but again, he's also like, this is where I think they, criticize him a little fairly, that, that in different ways, where they say, okay, they criticize him for being vague about, his terminology. And this is something I think, okay, they're right. He is, rather vague and loose in his terminology. By the way, libertarians are too. But, Yarvin still is being vague here in his definition of protectionism, because what he's actually talking about here in context is that, in his, kind of corporate monarchy that he would own, what he would want is, like, it's not protectionism like for the sake of, protecting industry. It's protectionism for the sake of protecting people. What he means like is like safety regulations and stuff like that. He's talking about like, okay, if we're going to be importing toys or something like that for children, I don't want them like being made of, not having lead paint on them. I don't want them to be made of plastic that has, endocrine disruptors that make you grow up to, be 29 years old and have a baby face like me. It's like, yeah, he doesn't want, that's what he's talking about. He's like, protectionism for the sake of actually protecting people from things that are, bad for them, like endocrine disruptors and stuff like that. And yes, and yeah, you might say, okay, there might be economic problems with that, or reasons why a private law society might not go for that. But at the same time, if it's a private law society, it's legitimate. And so your arguments against him being their arguments against him being a Luddite and a protectionist, again, fall on their face, because they're just not relevant to a private law society. And here I think that they actually criticize him, kind of, pretty unfairly. That they're talking, he has a discussion where he's talked about, hey, like, we have American monarchs, and but and they criticize him for this. I think this is a something that they've taken him very much out of context, because what he's talking about in those discussions is not the idea that like FDR or Lincoln were actually monarchs. They were not. They were dictators. And Yarvin has read Democracy, the God That Failed, where Hoppe goes in, and this was the book that converted him to a neo-reactionary. And so he knows full well that the difference between a dictator and a monarch, and he's using the term monarch pretty loosely here, in order to as a teaching tool to teach people about a completely different topic, which is like, hey, there's an American cycle, and roughly every 80 years we get a dictator who basically has unlimited power. And and he's answered what he's doing in that particular discussion, where they're taking him out of context of, is he's explaining about what we need to do about the deep state. And he says, hey, we need a right-wing dictator to get rid of them and just pay them off with pensions. And he's not actually saying that these guys are actually monarchs or advocating this kind of government. What he's saying is, hey, this thing is coming, and there's an opportunity coming for us in order to maybe get rid of the deep state, and maybe like, hopefully. I think Yarvin's being a little optimistic there, but but he's not advocating this kind of monarchy, and he definitely knows the difference between a dictator and a monarch. Where he was talking about this, I think where they quoted him from was like Tucker Carlson's show, which was like only an hour long, and it's mainly like boomer cons who watch it. So it's like, okay, he's not going to take the time to really drill down on the differences between a dictator and monarch and why they're so very different. And and again, we've already addressed what Yarvin's actual thoughts on monarchy are, which, by the way, is like his concept of a a corporate or monarchy goes back like a good 1700 years. It's not like he's using that idea out of context, because like literally it goes back to like the Christological discussions in the early church of the relationship of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. It's a corporation has like three major parts to it. It's like the customers, the management, and the shareholders. And they work by it makes profit by getting the customers and the shareholders both happy, by using the management in the middle as kind of a medium of exchange, where both all three sides have to feel like they're doing a better job for each of the other sides, and they're giving them more value than they're taking, subjectively, of course. And this mimics the idea of Trinitarian love, that, because whereas like the difference would be that in Trinitarian love, it's like it's a maximum you're trying to do the maximum amount of good, whereas in just this corporate idea, it's just more than the other guy is doing for you. And so in doing this, it actually this is why capitalism works, is that it mimics the idea of Trinitarian love. But as for like why this, how that relates to monarchy, well, we say God is king, God is the king. And so, and like, who is God? God is love. And what is love? Love is like tripersonal. It takes two to tango, and they have to be productive in order to. And but that's getting into theology. And so if they're going to accuse him of saying, I can hear them already trying to rebut this. If they're saying, well, he's being really, really loose with the definition of monarch, I'm like, no, like this is actually a very well established idea for the last like 1700 years at least. So this is actually he's actually on solid ground here. I don't know if he realizes that because he's an atheist, but he is on very solid ground, calling corporations monarchical, because again, God is king. So you know, if it works for God, it definitely works for corporations who are substantially less. So the you know, so for like slide number 7, let's see, the cathedral. And let me see, let me pull this back up. You know, he says, isn't the you know, was it Keith asked the question that, you know, isn't unaccountability a good thing to Yarvin? And the quick answer is no. Proper accountability is, and that's the sort of thing he's arguing for when he's saying, hey, this corporate, you know, when he says, I want a government that's run exactly like a corporation, you know, or exactly like a firm. It's like he's being really, really specific here, and I don't think they're quite taking him seriously. They kind of think that, oh, well, what he means is like the pyramid structure. It's like, no, that's not what he means at all. And he really means like a corporation which has proper accountability mechanisms in it that mimic Christian love or Trinitarian love. And so and they also you know, quoting him about, oh, look, he was wrong about you know, look, you know, he says, you know, what a problem the press controlled state is. And, you know, well, look, they're not much of a problem anymore because now we have, you know, social media and big tech. And I would point out that, you know, you're quoting him in 2008 before, you know, social media disrupted the cathedral. And then they subsequently joined the cathedral. So it's like, you know, it's like your argument didn't quite go as far as you thought it did, because now like the you know, big tech is far more of a problem now than, you know, than the cathedral ever was because of their censorship. So I don't know. It's, you know, I think that one argument kind of goes both ways. And in slide number 8 now, you know, that, you know, they're criticizing him again about you know, again, they're confusing a corporate monarchy and a medieval monarchy. And, you know, and they say, well, he can't, you know, be confusing internal and external governments. I'm like, well, he's not. You know, again, he's talking about a private law society. And slide 9 about the circulation of the elites. 1 second, I'm going to move this over here so I can just see my notes a little better. And slide number 9, when they're, you know, he's talking about the circulation of elites. I might actually play this. I might actually play this one because I have it up. Basically, the you know, they, you know, let me see if I pull this up right here. Yeah, I think we're going to play this one. And you know, they're saying, well, hey, look, you're saying you want to run like a company. Well, all these companies can, you know, go out of business. And, you know, they have, you know, there's all these empires that have been killed. And, you know, what, and, you know, well, what about that? I'm like, well, that sounds like a good problem to have. And again, we have a really functional, you know, restructuring mechanism with, you know, the buying and selling of shares that fixes all of the problems of, you know, medieval monarchy. So the, basically you know, let me just go ahead and play this.
Okay, so yeah, here are just a screenshot of all the different empires. By like any reasonable metric, these count as what's this word? Cannot eliminate. These are empires that were eliminated. Thomas Sowell. So now we're back to the private sector. He was saying that, well, because of the Constitution, you know, you can't explicitly regulate the New York Times; they're unaccountable. Well, Thomas Sowell in his book Basic Economics is discussing the rise and fall of business in the income mobility section. He says ordinarily we tend to think of businesses as simply money-making enterprises, but that can be very misleading in at least 2 ways. First of all, about 1/3 of all new businesses fail to survive for 2 years, and more than half fail to survive for 4 years. So obviously, many businesses are losing money. Even among the truly rich, there is turnover. Okay, so here we have the organization failing, but then you can say, well, yeah, technically empires and companies and those things exist, but you still have the people in power. So it just goes from like MySpace, yeah, that goes, but then you have Facebook. Even the individuals. So under no definition of cannot eliminate, this counts as being eliminated. Even among the truly rich, there is turnover. When Forbes magazine ran its first list of the 400 richest Americans in 1982, that list included 14 Rockefellers, 28 DuPonts, and 11.
Like even.
All right, so you know that you know, they go on to argue that, like, hey, if you're arguing that the New York Times is going out of business, you know, and therefore, you know, doesn't this kind of disprove your idea of monarchy? It's like, well, and you know, like, you know, they say, okay, well, wouldn't he say that you know, you're going to get you know, that one would get replaced by something bigger and better? It's like, well, yeah, like the New York Times went out of business and they got replaced by big tech, which is like arguably far worse, you know, than the New York Times ever was. New York Times is bad, but you know, big tech is like, you know, substantially, you know, doing far worse. You know, their censorship alone is worse than anything the New York Times has done. You know, maybe, you know, excepting the Iraq War, that was pretty bad. and probably all the other wars. But they, I don't think big tech has been given that chance yet. They did help with COVID though, so it's like that. The first chance they got, they were pretty dang bad, and they basically, let me go back to the slideshow. It's like their next thing where they're criticizing him about he's basically explaining the American history and again the American cycle of how these things got used to get done very, very well. He's not making an argument for like corruption, or he's not making an argument for monarchy here. He's explaining American history and the cycle that's coming up. He's not making an argument for monarchy here. And that this their next slide somewhere I'm definitely going to take him to task on is they're criticizing him for saying Hamilton was kind of our first monarch, and again he like dictator. He knows the difference between a dictator and a monarch, and he's not advocating a medieval monarchy. He's advocating a private law society. But they argue about like, Hamilton was so terrible, and they were making kind of the typical libertarian arguments. And these are arguments I actually disprove in my third Law of Archotropism video, where I talk about the reason why what Hamilton did saved us from being far, far worse of a government. Like, we were set up to be if you remember, like Rome, they had 26 in their first two. We're about 230 240 years old as a republic, and in our 230 years ish, we had like one civil war and two if you count Shays Rebellion, and but that was before the Constitution, which, by the way, the Constitution set out to solve. And if you remember Rome, because they were an unrestricted. What our founding fathers did, with the reason it was a right-wing coup, is that they had the Constitution to basically instantiate 2/3 of it of the government to be monarchy. So if you look at our government, it's and I'm saying monarchy in quotes now because it has monarchical characteristics, not that it is actually monarchy. It is a republic, but it had 2/3 of it, being the courts and the executive, are monarchical as an kind of an adjective, and the 1/3 of it is a Republican or Democrat. And by doing this, they installed like an artificially low time preference for power into a republic, because they made it 2/3 monarchy. And but by doing this, what they ended up doing, because again, what happens with the low time preference for power? Well, the same thing that happens with you have basically high interest rates or high amount of savings or high amount of like deferral and gratification, all that. You get a crap load of power when they see if the federal government is under consuming for like the first 100-ish years, but right up until we get the Federal Reserve, because the gold standard and the two ones that basically, okay, the argument I make is the fact that the reason the government got so huge was because the checks and balances worked, not because it didn't. Because what you ended up doing was you installed like you can think of it as a price floor on the interest rate of power, but because you set it so that the government is forced to underconsume power. So what's going to happen is, there's less predation in the private market. And you can see this like in our tax rates, where, because like tax rates until like the 20th century, really total tax rates never got above like 10%. And so our republic really was and there, by the way, there were quite, enormous ways that you could just get around not paying those get around paying taxes. And so that like our government was effectively under consuming for its first 130-ish years or something like that, depending on how you're counting. And it's like, so what happened was you got an explosion of wealth. You got an industrial revolution. You got the biggest tax base in human history. And and by the way, nothing lasts forever. Eventually the gold standard which was one of the main restrictions that worked on government at keeping it small. Eventually that broke. We got the Federal Reserve, and the 20th century happened. But up until then, you had a massive accumulation of power that eventually when that price floor finally broke, and hey, supply and demand are now able to meet, and we can have some real clearing. yeah, what did we get? We got 2 world wars, and we got the entire 20th century, which sucked. And so, but that was bad. But look at what Rome had. In Rome, there were 26 civil wars in their first 20 years, and that doesn't count the external wars. So it's like, by having the 2/3 monarchical system where the government was under consuming, and by the way, by under consuming, I mean it relative to, the way a normal republic consumes power, which is far higher. And so, it's like, Hamilton actually did us a real solid there. And granted, he was kind of a mixed bag because, he did some other things which were kind of shitty, but but again, like Yarvin has already talked. We shared that on like the first or second slide where Yarvin talked about the framers. He said, yeah, they failed. They had a design, and the government immediately diverged from that design and didn't diverge all the way. It took them like over a century to fully diverge, and but they finally got the but what they did, by and large worked. That the mixture of federalism, worked in terms of keeping the government the republic, I should say, artificially small. And because again, republics have that ability to grow at far beyond the production rate because they can use debt, and whereas in a way, and they can use it in a way that monarchs simply just can't, because they have different incentives. So yeah, Hamilton did us a solid, and we got the biggest government on earth because we had a republic that was under consuming relative to what normal republics do. And that worked out for a little over a century until it didn't. And the but I would also somewhat disagree with with Yarvin, that he said that monarchy is a pyramid structure, or that corporations are a pyramid structure. No, they're not. They really aren't. And small businesses are pyramid structures. Medieval monarchies are pyramid structures, but publicly traded Fortune 500 corporations are not pyramid structures. They're Trinity loop structures. Again, this is they're based on the idea of like Trinitarian love, where again, with love, it's a maximum thing, whereas with corporations, it's just a more thing, more than the other guy. And that's what makes capitalism work. It's not perfect, but it generally works way better than it doesn't. And so they go on to say, well, hey, in monarchy, you're just like one death away from this problem, from like chaos, basically. And that's true, by the way. And this was a critical flaw with medieval monarchy. But corporate monarchies completely resolve it. And as a side bonus, because now because there's a separation of ownership and management, where these are no longer the same thing, you can shoot the CEO, and that's going to tank the stock price for a few days until they can replace it with the CFO or the COO or something like that, or they could pick, but they'll just pick a new one, and that's fine, and it works. And it's like, but as a side bonus, because you've set, because again, management is accountable to the shareholders. Well, think of that as like like Caesar and Pompey. Why did Caesar and what was the number one reason why Caesar and Pompey went to war? Is because of the death of Caesar's daughter Julia, who was married to Pompey. She died in childbirth, and basically she was kind of a hostage. And this was something that you saw with medieval monarchies that they would constantly use, is they would use the marriage of their children to secure peace with another sovereign, on the idea that you're basically trading hostages in order to have peace. This was the only way you could trust each other. And but what this corporate monarchy does is it takes that concept of hey, your children are effectively hostages, and it multiplies it by like a factor of 1 million. Because what ends up happening is that let's say you have 1 million shareholders. Well, they all have like 2 to 3 kids each, and more than that in grandkids, and they're spread all over the place. And so basically, when you're thinking of, and you don't really know where all of them are. And so when you go to war, you have no idea if you're actually going to war with like your shareholders' kids. And by the way, if you start dropping bombs on places where your shareholders' kids live, oh boy, you're going to get fired really quick. The management and the C-suite are going to get fired very quickly. And, and this is, by the way, and if they get attacked, it's like, okay, they have an immediate incentive to respond and defend. And so this is and when you have tens of thousands of these corporations who none of them can go to war because, again, their shareholders are all over the place. It's like having a billion Julias out there as human shields, preventing states from going to war. Basically, this is by the way, and that doesn't even begin to take into account the profit mechanism as a disincentive towards war, because you think of like a war, it's like the most unprofitable activity you could do. All it does is destroy value, and you're spending a lot of value to destroy value. And it's a really dumb idea. When the objective is to make profit, and worse is that if you want to take over a corporation, just buy it. It's like just do a hostile takeover, a buyout, or like a leveraged buyout. It's so much cheaper and so much more profitable. That's how we do it today with all these modern publicly traded corporations, and with tens of thousands of them. Yeah, okay, there's going to be some consolidation there, but there's also some unconsolidation due to those diseconomies of scale that Ace talked about. So so basically, this is actually, this idea that you're one death away in corporate monarchy from chaos is not only is it completely wrong, this is actually a much better solution to the problem of war than anarchists propose. Because in anarchy, they have no real, they like, I might have rocket launchers on the border and like some insurance company will protect. No, that's a terrible idea. And not only is it wrong, it's like insurance companies have like repeatedly said, no, we are not going to war with states. We are not going to protect you. If you like say, and by the way, they've done this since like the 1980s, where like, if you're like in an international shipping contract and you want to ensure your contract, you want to ensure that your cargo, you want to insure your cargo. If you sail your ship through a war zone, your insurance contract is null and void, because that's the actual incentive of the insurance company. They want nothing to do with a war zone or anything like that. And so when libertarians are citing, insurance companies as like they're great protectors, the insurance companies are literally telling them right now, no, not us, never doing it. No. And so when Yarvin has this thing right here, this shareholder mechanism, this is a fantastic deterrent for war. This is, having billions of Julias as basically human shields who are going to prevent the corporations from going to war. And as a side bonus, let's say that they're just they're living beside a modern state that doesn't quite have that same incentive because they don't really care. If there's if they have shareholders who are living in a place, if a kind of a modern state wants to go to a war with one of these corporate states, all of the corporations have an incentive now to go in and attack the one modern state that is attacking another corporate state, because they have no idea where their shareholders are, and their shareholders are going to want them to protect their kids. And and so you have, not only is it a defense mechanism against war, it's also a mutual defense mechanism at the same time. And this is like by far the best solution anyone has proposed for dealing with the problem of war, which anarchists and ANCAS particularly say they really care about. So it's like I haven't heard a better one. And so basically, and they go on in the next slide to accuse him of say like he rejected markets or whatever. Like, source. It's like, where did he say that he rejects markets? I mean, the fact he wrote Patchwork certainly suggests otherwise. And again, like, they're arguing against medieval monarchy, not against Patchwork. And they say that, oh, he's having like a double standard here, where he's applying like idealism to libertarians, but he's not applying it to himself. And I would say, well, no, he's really not. He's kind of taking your ideas to their actual logical conclusion. And like, let's go on. Other American monarchs, again, we already kind of addressed this. And But again, he's just explaining the cycle and the opportunity we have coming up to get like a right-wing dictator like Pinochet to, help us get rid of the deep state. And he's not advocating like a right-wing dictatorship as his preference. His preference is patchwork, which is a private law society. And so, and again, because of Hamilton, we did get away with only one civil war instead of 26 like Rome. And then they accuse him of equivocation. It's like I'm trying to remember what their argument was here. It's like, shoot, I don't remember what their argument was here. Okay, yeah, here we go. Let's go ahead and just play this so I can refresh myself.
So in this, I also want to go into.
Can y'all hear this, by the way?
What I think Yarvin is doing here, unintentionally. I'm not assuming malice here. I think he's engaging in what's called a Mott-Bailey fallacy. So what Mott-Bailey fallacy is that you have a Mott, like it's essentially when you propose a commonsensical, uncontroversial proposition in your first half, and then you switch, you do an equivocation on the later half called the Bailey, and you switch it to an extremely narrow, like controversial claim. So an example of this would be like if Yarvin is saying that these companies are just like monarchies, right? They're like they have a CEO at the top, they have someone at the top, and then it's structured downward from there, right? Okay. You could say that they're structured like a monarchy in the sense that they indicate a monarchy.
Okay, I know what they're saying now. Basically, their argument is that, okay, when he's saying that, like, oh, if you like the benefits of your car, it's because it's made by monarchy, basically. And yeah, as I've already explained, he's actually correct on this, that because the corporation has that Trinitarian structure, yes, it is a monarchy. So it's not equivocation at all. And by the way, as ANCAPs, I would think that like it's a really slippery, it's a really kind of a tenuous ground you have right here, accusing him of equivocation when ANCAPs do this all the time with words like capitalism and anarchy. I mean, they use those two terms in ways that 99% of people do not use them. And so are you really in a like, if you're saying if you're accusing him of being loose with the terms with his term monarchy, are ANCAPs really in a position to judge when they use terms like capitalism and anarchy in ways that 99% of people do not use them? And I mean, you can argue that, oh, well, we understand these terms most properly or whatever. Well, he can say the same argument, for monarchy, where he understands it most properly or whatever. And, it's like, I don't think you guys have room to judge him on this. And so his next thing they criticize him on was like basically engineering projects, where he's talking about like the hey, there's the two biggest engineering projects of all time were done by basically monarchs. And again, what he's describing here, he's not advocating monarchy here. What he's describing again is the opportunity that's likely coming up for us again to get rid of the deep state. Again, there's that cycle of American dictators that we have every fourth term or something like that. And so he's it's like, I don't really disagree with their critique of the A-bomb, and I'm not sure Yarvin would either. And I will nitpick them just a little bit on that, because Hiroshima, they claim that this was like the biggest mass death event in human history. Actually, that would be like when the warlord Genghis Khan massacred the city of Nishapur in 1221. And that was when his army killed about 1.7 million people in under an hour. So he was literally Hitler before his time. And so that was actually the biggest mass death event in history. And you can do the math on it, because what the nuclear bomb killed, it killed like 66,000 people in like 5 minutes. So we can multiply that by 20 and find that okay, that number is less than the 1.7 million people that Genghis Khan killed in about the same amount of time, or at least at the same rate, I should say. And so I would also disagree with Yarvin a little bit here, because he says that the Apollo mission was driven by monarchy. No, that's definitely not true. That was driven by the CIA, not the presidency. And it was in response to the solar storm of 1957, where there was just a massive solar storm, and we didn't know it could go that big. We got lucky because it missed us. And if it hadn't missed us, it would have been bye-bye electrical civilization around the globe. And so we were really, and there was basically, it was that, and there's also some North Pole expeditions that happened with Admiral Byrd and Major Maynard E. White that in the 1930s and 1940s, and they came back and having unearthed like 9 alternating layers of basically equatorial and polar species. and flora and fauna, and basically all of these were rapidly buried, going back about like 100,000 years. So why that's important is a subject for another video, but suffice to say, the Apollo missions are not an example of monarchical power. This was driven by the CIA, and so the next thing is like, they criticize him for is his pencil analogy, where he's talking about like, hey, if you want to it's like, he's talking about why political power always is a response to we're about we're about a good 60% of the way through, so the next ones are going to go pretty quick. Basically, Yarvin here is talking about why there's no states naturally convert why there is a natural monopoly for aggression, and they're trying to debunk him here and saying, hey, why do we need a state? Why do we need this central power? And I think need is probably a bad word, a bad choice of word. Demand is a much better choice of word. And this is like where I can introduce like my theory of archotropism and its 6 laws, because basically aggressive order is demanded by the market, and basically it's an order where you have ownership and you don't get a choice, and you don't really get a choice in the matter. And so basically the reason why this isn't really just but if you my theory of archotropism usually starts off with okay, why is it that when you have chaos, why does that naturally consolidate itself into power? Why does that naturally grow the power system? Because if the market demands order, and chaos happens, that registers to the people as a shortage of order. So now this is basically like a layer 2 thing for them, where they want safety and security and predictability and all that. So this is like really, really high on like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So when you have a shortage of order, i.e. chaos or a panic, this is why people will naturally, start demanding the government seize power and put down the chaos, because this is something they're deeply afraid of. And so, I don't think that part is really in dispute, because we just kind of lived through like the greatest case example of it in human history in 2020, where you had a panic and people, wanted like, hey, we need way more power. Like the question wasn't, is there going to be a government intervention or not? It was the size. And, it basically it's like, it wasn't even like the size. It was like, okay, we're going to have the biggest government intervention in human history. How big are we going to make that biggest intervention in human history? This is exactly what people do when, when they're faced with chaos, they demand order. And this is, something I think Rothbard got wrong, is that the state isn't, not only is it the monopoly on aggression and violence, it is also like the sole provider of order. And there's reasons for that I get into in my archotropism talks for why that is. And I think I'll get into one later, but suffice to say, that basically legacy libertarian theory has no good solution, at least none that I accept, for this problem of chaos demanding power in order to restore order. And because basically the reason is power is the one thing that is not for sale in Ancapistan. That's their main problem. And Ace goes in here. He says, okay, well, there's all different kinds of power, and he lists a whole bunch of examples that I would classify as potential power, and like knowledge, wealth, and stuff like that. And I would disagree with him there, because there's actually 2 kinds of power. The other being kinetic power. That's the kind the state has. This is the one that's actually in demand. And again, kinetic power is not an exercise of like predation or coercion or stuff like that. That is not for sale in Ancapistan. And this is exactly what is demanded by the market whenever chaos outbreaks. At that point, they don't care about their rights, because like they're so afraid, like, I'll trade anything, make the chaos go away. And so like something like a Yarvinian state, it does have a mechanism for dealing with this. And it's like we can you might write something in the contract that says, hey, in an event of chaos or something like that, all bets are off, and we will crush whatever chaos comes our way or something like that. And they have a real centralized mechanism for dealing with it, Why it centralizes, we can kind of get, we can get it. Yeah, okay, we're going to get into it on the next slide. I see in my notes, because they criticize him for, saying that sovereignty is always conserved. And this is where Ace goes into the kind of the normal libertarian, explanation for why this, why you can divide power, infinitely. And this is not true. And this is one thing that where libertarians definitely get wrong, because again, they don't have a praxeology of power, which is something they desperately need. And, but to my knowledge, Yarvin has not been introduced to the laws of archotropism, which I'm going to, reference a few of them here, but he clearly knows them instinctively, as most leftists do. And so I can make his, he makes some different arguments. I can make his arguments far quicker and, more simply just using archotropism as an explanation. And so when he says, sovereignty is always conserved, it's because the marginal value of power is always conserved. And, we can prove this a priori, and basically this is where we get the first law of archotropism from, which is, the conservation of the value of power, which says that basically the marginal value of power, is always conserved. It can only be transferred from one wielder to another or changed in one form into another. And the reason for this is the reason it's a priori true and cannot be violated is that, you have something called the law of pseudo demand, which this is the way I've characterized it. I found something similar in Konkin, but he didn't quite take it this direction. So, but I haven't found anything like this anywhere else. If anyone else, knows where this is found, I did come up with it independently. If someone else knows where it's found in other libertarian writers, I'd be happy to, I'd be happy to give them credit. But right now, for the law of pseudo-demand, predators will prioritize acts of aggression according to the descending marginal value of each act of aggression, which is equal to the marginal utility an aggressor stands to gain from the act, multiplied by his chance of success, minus the marginal utility he stands to lose should he fail, multiplied by his chances of failure. The reason for this, the reason why this, basically because its value right here, it is a risk reward prospect. It is a zero sum transfer, because of that, its value is always going to be conserved, because it's always it's always me versus you. It's not this isn't a positive sum thing where we're both adding value and trading that value to create more value. This is a one-sided transfer. And so whenever it's a risk versus reward prospect multiplied by chances, effectively it's always percents of 100. That's just mathematically true. And the value is always going to be the value of any act of aggression is always going to be percents of 100, because again, it has to be me versus you. It's my chance of beating, my chance of succeeding in aggression against you, against your chances of defending yourself against me. And, and of course, what I stand to lose and what I stand to gain, which is, potential power. And so basically, Ace says, hey, this doesn't, saying that there's, sovereignty is always conserved doesn't preclude anarchism because the value of power can be infinitely divided. Well, okay, it can be infinitely divided. But the problem is that, that we've just established there, because it has a zero sum, it is unique in that it has a zero sum value structure. It is not a positive sum value structure, because again, it's uncreative by nature. You can just duh. And so but what you run into is, because the problem is that you run into the problem of the human action axiom, which is that humans are a bunch of chimps and we like to maximize value. Basically, the action axiom says that humans will use means over time to achieve ends. And because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, we will end up being utility maximizing monkeys, where we want the most ends for the least amount of means and time. And time is kind of a means, but we usually add it in there because it's a little bit different. But basically, So the reason, like, yes, you can infinitely divide the value of power, but the problem is humans are value maximizing monkeys. And so, if you look, this is where, kind of reflected in the second law of archotropism, which says that, power always seeks consolidation from low concentration to high concentration. What this kind of means in more human terms is that, strong prey upon the weak, strong being high concentrations of power, the weak being low concentrations of power. The reason it always consolidates is because of this, value maximizing behavior, where it's like, okay, well, how would you, if the value of power is always percents of 100, how would you maximize that? You would go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and and so on and so forth. And this is actually what we observe, is that in order to maximize value of power, it's a zero sum game, and you have to collect it and hodl it and and parlay it into more power. So yeah, if you can and so in order for Ace's assertion here to be true, he would have to assume that humans would value maximize everywhere else with positive sum value, but they would not obey their marginal incentives towards power, which again are always conserved, because again, it's always percents of 100. And value of power can neither be created nor destroyed because of this zero sum value structure. That it's the value of it's a transfer from you to me, basically by coercion, where it costs me basically nothing or something like that. And so because of this, but not only this, but because of this value structure, this is why you always get something like power preferring to coexist with power. Because think about it, like, if the value of power is basically me versus you, and we're fighting, and this is a risk that one of us is really not going to walk away from well. And, basically because of that, conflict ends up being a lot less valuable than cooperation. So whereas this is not the case in, a positive sum economy where, competition might actually lead to a lot more value. And, so, with this, because power always prefers to coexist, what you will end up with is, they naturally prefer to consolidate power and work together. In one of my archotropism essays, I explained this as like, okay, you're a criminal in a neighborhood and you're the only criminal in a neighborhood, and let's say a few extra, and you have basically the whole neighborhood to yourself to predate upon. And let's say 3 or 4 extra criminals come in and they start encroaching on your turf. Well, you could fight with them and, for complete sovereignty over your turf. Or, maybe alternatively, you pool your efforts together, you become a gang, and now you're able to predate a lot more effectively. And, maybe you could, take a portion of your proceeds from your theft and your predation and, hire an accountant, because you're probably not good at math if you're a thief. And, you could hire an accountant who would help you keep track of who's paid you your protection money or whatever. Or maybe you could hire a journalist to, say how you're helping the people with your, aggregate demand or something like that, like Paul Krugman or something like that. You can make some bullshit Keynesian argument. And, in order to justify your predation, you could argue, like, you have the journalists argue, oh, they really are protecting you, even though they're really clearly not. And so basically, yeah, that you can, by cooperating, these criminals can, actually, take on economies of scale. They can have division of labor, and they can do all of these, value. They can all do all of these more valuable acts of predation this way. So this is why, states always consolidate. This is why they are natural monopolies. It's because of this zero sum value structure. So Ace is actually, completely incorrect here. That this is a natural monopoly due to its zero sum value structure. And again, that doesn't make it right. It certainly doesn't make it moral, but it does make it real and something that we're always going to have to deal with, because again, these marginal incentives cannot be destroyed. Someone always has them. If you destroy them in one place, that just means you've transferred that value to somewhere else, and that somewhere else is now going to have an incentive to come after you. And and you'll have like an infinite game of whack-a-mole that is, just logically speaking, is impossible to beat. Because again, archotropism is a priori true. That's the main problem with it. There's no real getting around it. So slide number 20 is it's like, I'm not, they make some arguments here that I confess I don't understand what they're arguing for. Like they say something about like I don't but I think they're not answering Yarvin's central critique about why is the Darwinian fitness ideas that why is it that some ideas win as opposed to the moral ideas? Why is it the moral ideas lose and the incentive based ideas win? And so and like this is basically the post-libertarian question that Matt talks about, is like, okay, if libertarians are right about everything, why aren't we in Ancapistan already? What's different? And like that, basically, like if they're right about everything, why doesn't this thing work politically, like at all? Not even like a little bit. And so like and libertarians, they really have like no good answer here for this, like of why that, like, okay, let's say your ideas really are the most ethically superior. Let's just accept that as a given. And, why is it you're getting 1% of the vote? Like, and this is the point that Yarvin's kind of getting at here, and they're not really answering it. And, it's like, okay, you have, he's not making like an argument against, libertarianism itself so much as it is against like libertarian dogma and libertarian talking points. That, hey, you again, it's that central idea of earlier where he was saying that, hey, y'all don't believe anything productive. And in context, he's talking about, your ability to like, get elected and get your ideas legislated. And they just have no ability for that. I mean, they've been failing for a good 50 years, and again, with the problem of archotropism, we see that that chaos is a real problem that demands that people demand power in response to it, and when they don't really care about the whole morality of the problem, they just want that problem to go away. And they make another argument where against where Yarvin says, hey, like there's a problem where children have been taught that they're all special snowflakes and all that, and this is a problem. And I forget why he said that was a problem, but they attempted to disprove him by saying, well, no, if you look at like the Prussian school model, they're children are taught to obey authority, basically unquestionably and all that. And that like, isn't that even more Luciferian or whatever? And like as far as like Luciferian teachings go, I would actually say that Yarvin, Ace, and Keith are all correct here, because people are taught conflicting ideas. Like like saying they're taught to obey authority doesn't disprove that they're also taught that they're unique little social special snowflakes. It's kind of reminiscent of a C.S. Lewis quote from the Screw Tape Letters, where the greater demon Screw Tape says, hell's allies in the corporate press have been getting people accustomed for years to having multiple conflicting ideologies dancing around in their heads at one time, because they've what the corporate press has done has taught people to not think of ideas as primarily true or false. They think of them as like stark or courageous or outdated or modern or progressive or stuff like that. Like those are the things that humans really care about. They don't really care so much anymore about whether an idea is primarily true or false. And if you say that facts don't care about your feelings, you're a racist. You know what I mean? And so and after that, they kind of go back to critiquing him to for medieval monarchy, not patchwork. And so their next thing is a question of like, who watches the Watchmen? Well, the libertarians say we either don't need watchmen, or we have so many watchmen that everyone's watching each other. And I think this is somewhere where I think that libertarians themselves, like, they might not need government, but that doesn't mean other people don't want government. And and again, you could say, okay, well, you're conflating internal and external government. No, because again, patchwork is all internal government. And but also, it's like, again, people also don't care about the whole external government thing either, because again, they don't care about morality. And I say this as a Christian, that it kind of pains me to say that after 2,000 years of teaching them all about sin, they still sin quite a lot. And they don't really care that some things are like wrong and bad for them. They kind of want the bad for them. And and again, it's like if humans cared about morality, Christianity would have worked, because the morality that's based on love that Christians teach is far superior to the idea of morality that's based on property that libertarians teach. And so if people cared about morality, if they really cared about like love and all that, it's like, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But the fact is that humans by and large do not care about morality at all. And it's only for them a means to an end. And it's, by the way, and because it's not the only means to those ends, they end up going with less moral means to those ends, which is why we're having this conversation in the first place. And so people have, I think this is something libertarians really need to accept, and something that Yarvin talks about a lot, is that humans have a very real demand for power. And we're still living through this right now, where like half the country thinks that the regime isn't doing enough to ruin people's lives over a flu. And even when they find out that the state caused the virus and funded it, what do? It's like they're calling for better government, not less government. And so like, it's like his thing here that, hey, you can't not have watchmen, and and the watchmen need to have proper incentives, that you can't just have so many watchmen that they're all poorly incentivized. It's like just having this is the same idea as why don't we just have 10,000 republics or whatever? Well, because the republics are all bad. It's like, and this isn't going to change. This is why anarchy, this pure kind of anarchy doesn't work, is because it doesn't solve the central problem of, it doesn't solve the central problem at the root. And that problem is that humans are evil. And you might say, well, okay, if humans are evil, well, let's not give them extra power. Let's not give them a monopoly on violence if they're evil. It's like, well, you have one thing wrong right there, and that is that you didn't give that to them. They took it by force. Again, humans are evil. That's not a reason why you need a government. It's the reason why you have one in the first place. So and I think libertarians, they need to accept that. It's like the reason we have a government in the first place is because people are evil. This is not the reason why we need a government. It's the reason why we have one in the first place. And so, and you're going in and trying to teach them, give them a message on morality that they don't care about because they're evil. So it's like, this is, so Yarvin's central point that, hey, liberty really needs to be engineered. This is where that comes from, is that, okay, humans don't care about morality. They care about incentives, and they are fine with using immoral means that they're incentivized towards over moral means that they're less incentivized towards. And they'll just call, and if they need a reason, they'll find one. They'll just say it's for the greater good, and then they're all done. And so that, we need a real system here. And this is something he's proposing, and which they're just not. And and let's go to slide number 22, where they say, hey, no violence, it does not equal no actors. Like the idea that you could build a system without like any sort that would just run by itself. But of course, we don't think that's actually how it's going to work. It's like, well, basically that, what Yarvin is critiquing them there is that, hey, you can have a system where nobody is in charge. And we've already kind of proven why that's not the case. Again, because sovereignty is always conserved. The marginal value of power is always conserved. It's never zero. And and so saying that, basically you have, again, to assume that you could have a society without rulers, you would basically have to you would have to assume that one second. You would have to assume that humans are not going to value maximize, which is just always untrue. And they will value maximize by whatever means are most efficient to them, and most suit their preferences, and time. And so and again, predation, aggression are some of those incentives. So you can't just say it's just like saying, okay, well, we can have security companies. Well, who's watching the security companies? Oh, other security companies. Well, who's watching them? It's like, this is, and again, this gives you the problem of, this is why Ayn Rand was wrong. Ayn Rand said that, oh, well, the reason you can't have private police or whatever is because they're all fight with each other. No. And we've actually already just proven that they're all going to cooperate with each other to be evil. Because again, these marginal incentives are always conserved. And so if this is always conserved, we need a mechanism for kind of controlling that, or at least trying to give it proper incentives. And this is something that Yarvin's kind of proposing here with his corporate monarchy, which is not the medieval monarchy that they've been kind of straw manning him as. As supporting. He does not support the medieval monarchy. He's supporting the private law society of basically private law society, as we said earlier on, and we proved it earlier on. And so basically, like, libertarians, they do seem to believe that they can build a society where people don't have a massive demand for power, or where power itself is just not going to be valuable to people. And again, like, this is why I say libertarians really need to adopt the theory of archotropism, as it explains why the people want the power and why we aren't already living in Ancapistan. Again, if libertarians are right about everything, why aren't we already living in Ancapistan? It's like, we should already be there if you were right. And we should have been there a long, long, long time ago, but we're not. And again, that's because this value of power actually exists, and it's real, and it's, it's like sitting close to the top of, virtually everybody's, hierarchy of values. And, and I'm sure they're going to respond to me on this. So I'm going to go ahead and ask them, this question, if if libertarianism as it stands today is full and complete and true about how value works, and that having these states is so counterproductive to human progress and counterproductive to the human condition, and everyone would be better off in Ancapistan, why aren't we already living there? And why don't libertarians win more than just a few percentage points in politics? Like, if your theory is correct and complete, then why is reality so radically different? Again, my explanation is that your theories are incomplete and your assessments of human preferences are inaccurate. And and by the way, this is Yarvin's explanation as well. Although he doesn't use archotropism, but he has it. But as like a diplomat son who was raised in the Beltway, he understands it instinctively. And again, people want power precisely because it's valuable to them. It doesn't make it right, but it does make it real and something we have to deal with. And simply saying that, oh, people won't value it in Ancapistan, or saying that, oh, we have other ways of dealing with it. It's like, no, you don't. Yes, and that's a point I really want to get across to them. Again, if you think it can be subdivided, well, I've already proved why that's wrong, because humans want to maximize value, and that's just a priori true. You can't disprove it. So, and like, let's go to slide number 23. We're almost done because there's only like 30 something, and these are going quick. And they make, I'm trying to remember, this is, kind of extension of earlier, where they were saying that, like, hey, we can just teach them to not use power or something like that. And like, well, no, because again, this is something that's a priori true, that, this value of power is always conserved. And so as long as people are willing to pay people to use power for them or against them, power will be supplied to them. This is the fact that people are evil is not why you need a government. It's why you have one in the first place. Like, basically, this is specialization. Most people are not, they're peaceful mostly because they're not specialized for violence. That does not mean they don't demand it. Like, I'm not specialized for, making my own food. That doesn't mean I don't need to eat. It's like, I have, division of labor where, like I'm effectively paying a grocer and a farmer to make that food for me. And so just saying that, oh, well, most people are, peaceful, kind of peaceful. No, they're not. It's like that, this is like saying, well, saying most people are most, very few people are statists I should say, few people actually work for the government. It's like less than 1%, I don't know, like 2 million employees or something like that. Well, that's like, and then you can add in an extra like 1 million or something like that too, or something like that. Where you're like 1 or 2 or 3% of the people of the population work for the government. Well, this is like saying, 1 or 2 or 3% of the population are farmers. Big deal. Doesn't mean people don't want food. Doesn't mean people don't want power. And just saying you can unlearn political authority is just false, because it's a priori false. This is a means that they will always demand, and we need a system for dealing with it, which Legacy and Capistan does not have. And see, slide number 24, the iron law of oligarchy. Again, he's not making like a moral argument here. He's making an engineering argument that, power is always valuable to people. Hierarchy is always valuable to people as an efficiency mechanism. We put somebody in charge because, that's a much more efficient way of making collective decisions. If you have a whole bunch of people all trying to make their own decisions for themselves, they don't do a very good job of it. So what they naturally do is they say, okay, that guy's smart, he's in charge, and he's going to help us organize these means of production in a peaceful and prosperous way. And that's how companies work. And so basically, because hierarchy is just an efficiency mechanism, and it cannot be. It's as immutable as the action axiom, because again, we want the most ends for the least amount of means and time. So if you have that. These two statements that, power is always valuable to people and hierarchy is always valuable to people, then put that together, hierarchies for power are always going to be valuable to people. And like this is immutable, and it needs to be dealt with. You can't just hand wave it away like they're kind of doing here. And I'm not going into depth because we're already at an hour and 30. And they went for like 3 hours. I'm trying to go through this as quickly as possible. In the Yarvin makes the argument that like ethical axioms are not debatable because people don't care at all. And and they criticize him on like the moral level. Okay, well, that still doesn't make it right, and again, it's like Yarvin's not really making a moral argument here. He's making an engineering argument, because the moral argument doesn't matter to people. Again, it's like they're evil. That's why we have the government in the first place. It's not why we need one. It's why we have one. And so like, this is also my justification for the anti-tax. Is like, we can't convince people that libertarianism is like the most moral and make them care about it. So how about we just like pay them to adopt libertarianism, because, they do care about getting paid. And, so that, by the way, misesgop.com/donate if you want to donate to that. And set that up right there. Basically like the fact so few people are libertarians should like prove that point true, that ideological thinking is a very regressive phenotype, because it's nearly always maladaptive. Like if you have, let me put it like this, like if you have to, like if a tiger is charging at you and you have to think about what's the most right thing to do, you're probably not going to make it. Like the guy who sees the tiger charging and either tries to fight back or run, like that guy has a better chance, one way or the other, than the guy who has to think about what his incentives are. That's why ideology is always it's less adaptive than incentive driven thinking. And again, like for what's highly adaptive, and this is the incentive based thinking has worked for 200,000 years of human evolution, and incentives can be pretty easily socially engineered, which is why Yarvin is making an engineering argument, not a moral argument. That and so like, and again, Christianity has been at this moral ideology game for 2,000 years. And and what worked was actually better incentives, like Christian monarchy, that not so much the moral teachings, but the incentive structure of Christian monarchy was so vastly superior. This is why it actually worked. And so it's extraordinarily difficult to convince people that something like that's it. And like ultimately, it's extraordinarily difficult to convince people that something that benefits them is evil. And that's like the point that Yarvin is making here, is that like, hey, people want this state thing here because it pays them, it rewards them, they want it. And and you're trying to convince them that this thing that pays them is evil. And like, well, good luck. Let's focus on an engineering problem. Let's treat this as an engineering problem of incentives. And so like, again, back to why people value states. Humans are value maximizing monkeys. They value power, and they value hierarchy, both of which have immutable value. And put them together and you have states. This is an engineering problem, not a moral one. And and just browbeating people with morality like Puritans is not going to work. So slide number 27, we are almost done. Yeah, basically 27, 28, 29, 30, they're criticizing him for COVID, and there's no fucking way I'm defending Yarvin on COVID. He's way off base here. I agree wholeheartedly with the spirit and the words that, Ace and Keith are bringing to bear against him on this issue. Yeah, if I'm going to be charitable to Yarvin, it's like I think his judgment was, highly skewed by the fact that his late wife, having a severe congenital heart condition, it's like, so she was an extremely high risk group. Like her father died in his 30s or something like that because of the same exact heart condition or something like that. And, COVID greatly threatened her, and he basically had to live inside of his house without leaving for a whole year. And she eventually died from that same heart condition earlier this year. So, COVID really was a serious threat to her. And I think, like if I were, stuck in my house for a whole year, I would go crazy and I would start making really shitty arguments about COVID, and why we should be using aggression against it and all that. And yeah, I think he's just wrong. And, and his judgment was skewed by, his late wife having a heart condition and him being on effective house arrest because of that for the entire time. And so, but also like, he's arguing for state intervention broadly here, not for monarchy specifically, although I'm sure he might make the same thing. And, this is by the way, this is also just another thing that, hey, who was worse on COVID? Was it the private companies or was it the government? In many cases, it was actually the private companies, and I know, like, Ace will, and they'll argue that, hey, maybe the private companies were worse, but hey, at least they're legitimate. But this has been this has been a real terrible 2 years for like free market capitalism. And this is getting into an argument I'm going to make later on, but private companies were worse than most states because of that legitimacy. Again, it's the problem of, consent of the government, is that people will consent to quite a lot of tyranny. And maybe the private companies do better than Andrew Cuomo, but that's about it. I mean, DeSantis was way better for freedom than the private companies, and I'm sure Yarvin would disagree with that, and I would disagree with him. And I will also, reassert that, hey, archotropism is a critical problem, and that the Ancapistan, the legacy Ancapistan model, as compared to the patchwork model, which is also a private law society, the Ancapistan model has no good mechanism for supplying power and aggression to people who are panicking over chaos, which is like, I mean, this is what's demanded during crises. This is, I don't know, I think this is pretty much unavoidable. And so the slide number 31, we are so close to done. Moral nihilism. They're going after him for being a moral nihilist, and okay, he is a moral nihilist. And basically they saying that hey, they're saying that, hey, well, we have all of these. Actually, I don't remember. Let me actually go in and see what they were arguing here. I don't quite remember. Let me see. Nope. Okay, here we go.
Which is why that's so sad. If I look, and I believe this is where the less capitalized. When they talk about racist, colonialist, sexist, homophobia, whatever else, they don't say, I have studies, and the majority of the studies tend to show that it doesn't work. They'll say that sometimes about very few. Their biggest points where they get the most amount of power is racism inherently bad, unacceptable. Sexism inherently bad, unacceptable. We cannot have this colonialism theory and all this stuff. So what Hans Hoppe says is that we have the moral high ground actually, and that's how we can have a stable.
Okay. I remember now. Basically, their argument is, hey, well, the left wins by seizing the moral high ground and arguing from it. No, that is completely wrong. That is not why the left wins. The left wins in spite of themselves, because again, this is why they lost for like, a good, 15, 16, 1700 years straight, under Christian monarchy, where the left lost every single day, every single decade of every single century for like 1500 years. They were losing. And the reason they're winning right now is that the incentive structure of a republic is slanted left always, because again, when you have when consumption of power can equal the production of power, which is where we are right now. Republics can scale basically infinitely because they have a much higher time preference for power. basically what that leaves you is you're going to have an increasing scarcity every single day, every single year, until the republic finally dissolved. This is why they have like a 200-year lifespan, is that, they basically eat themselves to death. They consume themselves to death. And so the left, right, and when that scarcity increases, you get closer and closer to equality. You get more and more degenerate activity. This is something Hoppe talks about in Democracy, the God That Failed. He calls it the decivilizationprocess. This is 100% the reason why the left is winning. They're not winning because they're winning because they are winning because the whole playing field is slanted in their favor, and they're not winning because they're seizing the moral high ground. They're winning basically in spite of themselves because all of the incentives are political incentives are aligned in their favor. And basically republics always have relatively short, they're always relatively short-lived because of their incentives, which increase scarcity. They increase degeneracy, hedonism, violence, criminality, profligacy, and eventually barbarianism. And Yarvin isn't arguing for doing nothing, because working towards a patchwork of corporate monarchies is definitely not submission to evil either. And they go on to say, look, people won because look, morality won when slavery was abolished. No, not at all. And that you really should look into go watch Pete's interview on the Reconstruction era with Ryan Dawson for more details on this. But basically, slavery was abolished because the Union wanted the North's transcontinental railroad to beat the South's transcontinental railroad, which was being built by slaves. Cronyism, not morality, ended slavery. And ironically, it was perverse and otherwise evil incentives that ended slavery in America, as it did elsewhere in the world. Because in the United Kingdom around the same time, the reason they ended it there was because the Tories, I'm pretty sure it was the Tories, they wanted votes. It's they wanted the votes. They wanted to give all the slaves votes. That was why they wanted, because they wanted to get elected. It's that was the whole reason they ended slavery in the UK. And it was cronyism that ended slavery here in the United States. It was evil that unironically ended evil. And so this was not a case of morality winning the day, or because the abolitionists were making such moral arguments. This was corporatism and cronyism hijacking a moral movement, which, it's like the story of progressivism that happened all throughout. What does Dave Smith say about progressivism all the time? That it was hijacked by the corporations immediately. Duh. It's hey, we want a managed economy. It's well, great. Here's your managers of economy, Goldman Sachs. It's okay, not quite what they were looking for, but yeah, this is exactly what happens. That it's actually cronyism that usually hijacks the morality. But they also have another problem here, because they're arguing that for a morality that's based on property, when actual morality is based on love. The good book says God is love, not God is property. And property rights are a component of love, but they're not the whole thing. Not by a long shot. One doesn't need to argue for love. It simply isn't necessary. It has its own built, inborn incentive system that drives it forward. And everyone just naturally recognizes, love is at the top of the morality hierarchy. Yeah, and that's why we say God is love. God is at the highest point of the hierarchy, and God is love. So basically, the problem we face is that false loves also have inborn incentive systems too, which will always exist. That's what archotropism here. And the problem is not one of moral identification, because people know that love is moral. And again, the Bible also says that and again, you don't have to be a Christian to believe this. You just have to be logical and basically human, to see that that love is the most moral thing we can find. And the Bible says that in love there is no sin. There are no violations of the law. And in reference to which was the law it's referring to there is the law of Moses, which was an anarchical covenant. So it really was a property right. It's hardcore property rights right there. And by the way, the biblical Israel, the one is by far the purest and most successful anarchy that ever existed. And libertarians won't touch it with a 10-foot pole because it was a shit show. And but it did have a pretty, for its time, it had an extremely progressive moral incentive. It had extremely progressive laws for its time, which was like 3,500 years ago. So you're basically talking about like Bronze Age barbarians, kind of, or and so the basically, what, like, the problem is not one of moral identification. Identifying morality to people is easy. Like getting them to behave that morality is extremely hard because they care about incentives, not ideals. And the incentives, our love, are not the only ones that exist. And we have to socially engineer all of those incentive systems that actually exist, to give the incentives of love, a leg up on all of its competition. We can't just assume that people are always going to be loving and good. They're not. They're hateful, they're fearful, they're prideful, etc., etc. And again, this is why I like the idea of a corporate monarchy, because corporations work because they mimic, or to a lesser degree, they mimic Trinitarian love. And again, that's like with love, with Trinitarian love being you're doing the maximum good to the other person, and they're doing the maximum good back to you. With and this value for value creates more value. And basically with corporations, it's I'm doing more value to you and you're doing more value to me, and value for value creates more value. And so it's a mimicry there, where it's more is mimicking most. And so so this is why I really like that corporate monarchy structure, which again, he's talking about a private law society here. He's not talking about a medieval monarchy, and which again is the number one reason why all of their arguments against him have failed so far, is that they didn't understand that he's not talking about a medieval monarchy. He's talking about a private law society. And we don't, again, I reiterate my argument that, we don't need a state because people are evil and one is necessary to make them good. We have one in the first place because people are evil and they want states here to facilitate that evil. And what Yarvin is proposing in Patchwork, without realizing it, is a system of statecraft that mimics love. And that's why it's a much better system. And so finally, we get to I'm pretty sure this one is the last one. Let's see, go back to this. Yeah, here we go. Comparative questions. They say, states exist because, they ask which system incentivizes innovation and growth? Bad actors exist. Which system acts them best? And where does equilibrium lie? And they say medieval monarchy again has no. They go right back to debunking medieval monarchy, which he is not advocating, and he is advocating a private law society, which is answers to question number one, and and actually let's go ahead and compare, because here's what I did here. I decided, okay, well, let's answer all the questions and compare. Okay, so which system incentivizes innovation, growth? And well, anarcho-capitalism, not at all, since it is people's economic demand that created the state in the first place, due to the power, the value of power being valuable, just a priori. And all you're doing when you get rid of the state and Ancapistan is you're creating pent-up demand, which is going to blow up in your face, like pent-up demand always does. If you want to prove me wrong, if you want to prove Yarvin wrong, you must prove that aggression doesn't have value, which is a priori false. It's not just empirically true; it's logically true. And so, let's compare that to Patchwork. It's a private state born of legitimate private property, and I know Ace, disagrees with that, the private state terminology, because okay, you can't use, he said you can't use an adjective to modify a noun. I'm like, okay, I disagree. And yes, even if it's, he might think it's like a contradiction in terms, I don't. And but a Patchwork is a series of tens of thousands of a private states that are born of legitimate private property, and which one has a kind of a one size fits all approach to dealing with people that no longer consent to them by physically removing them from the property. Again, we don't need prisons, we don't need maybe we don't need a death penalty, maybe we do. I'm not too opposed to it, but hey, their idea is, hey, we're not going to have criminal law anymore. We're going to be basically back to civil law. and which is, places we've had that way I've had that approach before. And so we're just going to remove them from the property if they break their contract to the state, which is a real contract they actually have to sign, as we talked about earlier. It's like they have to leave. And for criminals that violate other people's property rights, all bets are off. And Yarvin, I think he does go into it. I don't remember it, but I imagine the criminal justice system for actual criminality will probably be substantially closer to like a Genghis Khan or a, King Darius the Mede approach to criminal justice, than the current model. Is it perfect? No. Is it comparatively better? Immensely. And they ask him about like, okay, well, what about the North and South Korea problem? It's like, well, we already addressed that. And, because like, if this is a for-profit mechanism that, if this is a for-profit entity that is accountable to its shareholders, shareholders want more profit, not less. And let's face it, South Korea is far, with its, kind of, liberal freedoms, is far more profitable, than, more than like almost like 2 orders of magnitude, not quite 2 orders of magnitude, but, actually way more than 2 orders of magnitude, like a factor of 20 something more profitable than North Korea. So yeah, that's like, which one do you think the shareholders are going to prefer? They're going to prefer the freedom model. And they ask, well, hey, bad actors exist. And I'm like, yeah, this is like a catastrophic problem for legacy anarcho-capitalism, because in your worst case scenario, you have a broken circulation of elites that leaves them unincentivized to be civilized towards the plebs, who are also uncivilized and already demand the elite's aggression as a service, leading to an explosive, an explosion of pent-up demand, probably resulting in the shitty liberalism that we have right now. And your best case scenario is that, when you say, my property, my rules, et cetera, you remember that when you did, well, what you just did without intending to is you just told all of the elites that they can have virtually unlimited power if it's their legitimate private property. And like, what do you think they're going to do with that information? Like, I'm just a theory, but I imagine what the elites will do with that, knowledge that that they can have unlimited power if it's their property, is that they're going to team up with a bunch of other aspiring elites, to form, that they trust, in order to form hundreds to thousands to maybe tens of thousands of publicly traded corporations, in order to buy up all that land and make this endeavor that will eventually end up creating Yarvin's patchwork. Checkmate. That's checkmate right there. It's like basically like your best case scenario in Ancapistan is patchwork, because the elites are going to say, hey, I can have unlimited power. It sounds great. All I need to do is buy up the land with elites I trust. And, I can do that through corporations pretty easily. And then I win, and so, and they'll end up just creating patchwork, which again is a private law society, not a medieval monarchy. And so, patchwork, it's like, okay, we can kind of just skip to the end. It's like the elites are incentivized to be, decent, to both their customers and to their shareholders. Is this panacea? Is it a silver bullet? Certainly not. But certainly doing so well, it's doing well so far for Fortune 500 companies. It seems like it's working. And, it's like, okay, well, where does equilibrium lie? In anarcho-capitalism, the price equilibrium mechanism that determines the value of power technically doesn't exist. So they actually have a broken price. They actually have a pricing problem. Imagine that. That's kind of ironic. This is the problem of our archotropism, is completely unhandled. And to the limited extent that it does, that it is kind of handled, like it would end up creating Yarvin's patchwork. And again, that's the best case scenario. Your worst case scenario is that you get the shitty liberalism that we have right now. And, and like patchwork, well, let's compare that to patchwork. It has 2 functioning price mechanisms in order to channel archotropism with. One, through its customers voting with their dollars and their feet, because again, same as a normal joint stock corporation. And in order to live under the joint stock corporation's jurisdiction, they have to sign a contract. And if they break that contract, they have to leave. That's basically, and so It's like, yeah, there's one price mechanism right there that actually deals with the value of power, but also there's a second one, because through its shareholders buying and trading corporations' shares as they see fit. That they basically, because if a corporation is, not doing a very good job at handling those information bottlenecks, et cetera, if they're not doing, being as profitable as they can be, which, by the way, is profit in the long term, not in the short term, because again, if investors were valuing just saying, oh, well, why don't we just loot everything right now? Well, okay, now you've gotten back to, where Rothbard kind of proves this wrong, is that, hey, the predator will end up predating upon his last meal, and then the predator dies. So that's obviously not their incentive. Their incentive, and again, that's not a panacea, because you can still get like a North Korea. But again, North Korea is a medieval monarchy, not a corporate monarchy. North Korea has no shareholders. So, and then we end up at the, hey, monarchy has no constraints. And again, we're back to them arguing against medieval monarchy, not corporate monarchy, not the private law society patchwork that Yarvin is arguing for. Last slide. That they're saying, here's what Yarvin leaves out. A worldview that does not distinguish between a boxing match and assault should be rejected by any attempt. Is like, again, he doesn't do that. They're not understanding that he's talking about a private law society, not a medieval monarchy. And, we're basically just back to them, trying to strawman him, as a medieval monarchist, when in fact he's a corporate monarchist and, an advocate for a private law society. This is, and that is basically the end right there. And so, like I said, if you, watch like basically the first 10 minutes minus the first 2 where I was muted, if you watch those, you basically got the gist of the argument, of why their 3 hours of arguments were completely incorrect. Because, he's not talking about a medieval monarchy. He's talking about a private law society, or at least a very different version than, than libertarians like to, than like they paint it as. This is a much more like totalitarian, technocratic society, version of a private law society. And in some of it, I think he's being like tongue in cheek. Some of it, I think he's being, really edgy just to try to prove a point. But I disagree with that. I don't think it would be nearly as totalitarian or nearly as extreme, for, quite a few different reasons. And, there's, good arguments to be made against his patchwork. They didn't make them. And arguing against medieval monarchy, that is not a good argument against patchwork. So that concludes my rebuttal. I got it in just under 2 hours. I'm going to get to shave off about, maybe 2 minutes of it, because, I was muted for like the first part of it. And well, thank you very much tonight for joining. I'll be splicing in some ads later. And again, if you want to talk more about this or learn more about this, you can join my supporting listeners group at subscribestar.com/popular-liberty. And if you want to, of course, you guys know where to follow me on Twitter at @popularliberty_. And, I would like to have this conversation with, Ace and Keith. And because I think they actually would have some good arguments to make against actually, Yarvin's actual position. And, I would welcome that discussion to have with them. I'm happy to have both of them on at the same time to talk about that. Because again, these are 2 good guys that I, genuinely like and genuinely respect. And I think they were unaware of, Yarvin's actual position. It is a little nuanced, and they were just unaware of it. And they made, it sucks that you made a 3-hour presentation, because they clearly put a lot of work and effort into it. But, but they had a critically false assumption that, rendered all of their arguments false. Or not all of them, but, again, they were correct on COVID, and I would not defend Yarvin on COVID. I didn't. So all right. Well, thank you very much, guys. I'll talk, thank you for joining this episode, and catch you guys next time. Peace.